Okay, well, I'll keep an eye out for anyone joining later, but I think we'll start. So I'll just I'll start by introducing Richard Askwith. For those who don't know, I'm sure you've all read at least one of his books, but you might not know all of his books. And personally, I don't know all of your books, Richard. I'm gonna stick to the running books, but there are other books, and if anyone else has read any of the other books and they want to ask him about that, I think you're game for that, Richard, I'm sure.
I'm going for anything and reason. Yeah.
So Richard, and I'm always interested. Your book is always called the cult classic, Feet in the Clouds. I wonder if you ever envisaged it becoming a cult classic, but I'll ask you about that later. That was about fell running in the Lake District, then his rather controversial Running Free, which got a few people riled up. Uh, then his brilliant biography of Emil Zátopek, Today We Die a Little. Is that the correct title? And I was telling Richard that we have a book club for those in my on my Patreon page. And we've read about 15, 16 running books. And Today We Die a Little is the favorite book of the whole series so far. And then Richard's recent book, which is The Race Against Time, which is all about adventures in later life or late life running.
It's called late life running.
Late
Yeah. It was
life
meant to be
running.
about running in old age, but I was told I
Yeah.
wasn't allowed to say the words old age.
No, it's much more delicately put, late life running, I think. So yeah, I mean, for brilliant running books, Richard has written other books which I have to say I haven't read, but yeah. So I'm just going to hand this over. So for everybody, if you keep yourselves muted until you want to ask a question, there is a way of putting your hand up, which is if you click on React, one of those is at the bottom of that it says raise hand. So if you click raise hand, then I know you've got a question. And then I'll just throw it over to you one by one to ask Richard whatever you want about his running, his writing, and anything in between. And Richard reserves the right not to answer. So who is going to start us off? Anyone got a question they would like to ask? I mean, I do have an obvious one to ask, just to get us warmed up. Is are you working on a book at the moment? And if so, what is it about?
I am working on a book at the moment, but it's like so obscure that I hardly dare even mention it to anyone. Um, it's a book about a dead Czech runner who no one's ever heard of, who's been dead for 50 years, who is fantastically interesting. Um, and I actually don't think I'll even find a publisher for it because it's just no. My agent said this won't be an easy sell. I think that basically sums it up. But it's just someone I find really interesting. It was someone who ran in the 1908 and 1912 Olympics, and he also did about 50 other sports. He about 20 other sports. He was just a sort of polymath, and he was a terrific figure. And he was also a sort of a tramp and a vagrant, and he spent a lot of time just living wild in the woods. And he ended his life, in fact, as a homeless tramp. In between, he got put in old people's homes and kept escaping and going out to try and do exciting things in the mountains. His name was Emmerich Rath, and I think it's going to be a really interesting story. But
Wow.
it's very obscure, and so I try to keep quiet about it most of the time.
And how have you gone about researching something that far back and that obscure?
Um, in the usual way, I mean, I've done this a few times with Czech stories, and if I do write this, it will be like the third book in a what will then be a trilogy of sporting books with Czech heroes. And with Zatopek, it was fine. Everyone knew about Zatopek, and there was actually too much information, rather than too little. But then I just sort of found out about this story about a female jockey of the 1930s called Lata Brandisova, and I didn't mean to really write a story about it, a book about it, but it just sort of is one of those things that it just got interesting, and you just sort of pull one more thread and then another thread and keep trying to find out more things, and you ended up spending massive time on it, speaking to lots and lots of people, finding lots of people who know the story or have little traces of the story. And eventually that turned into a book that was called Unbreakable. So that's another of my books, and it's not about running. And likewise, this one, you just sort of ask people. It's a sort of story where it is a very interesting, but there are certain very interesting people. And I guess I found this when I wrote Feet in the Clouds. You go along to the Lake District for the first time and say, I want to write a book about fell running. And people say, that's weird. No one ever writes a book about fell running. Then you say, well, I want to find out about Joss Naylor. And I say, oh, yeah, Joss Naylor, I know this. And
Right.
then you want to talk to so-and-so and all that. And once you start looking into the story, you find that if it's worth telling, I think people, encourage you to do it. People are keen that the story should be told. And that was certainly the case with fell running. And I hope it's going to be the case with this dead Czech tramp as well.
Okay. Oh well, I hope it gets public. I'm intrigued by the storyline you've given us so far. Yeah, sounds intriguing, and God, I hope they can sell it. We've got some questions. Let's, Gene, do you want to unmute yourself and go first there?
Yeah. Hi, Richard. Just wanted to ask you about when you were writing. Today we died a little about Zatopek. It's one of my favourite sports biographies. But I suppose two questions. One was, was he a hero of yours before you set out to write the book, or how did you choose it? And then you have a second question is, you have one of the chapters, say it ain't so, Emil, towards the end where you were sort of investigating the rumours as to whether he was a spy for the communist authorities and stuff. And I remember coming to the chapter, and as a reader, I was kind of saying, "Oh my God, I hope to God, for such a larger than life character and someone who's so full of joy and stuff that I was." I was kind of hoping that you wouldn't have found the evidence. Was that something that you were kind of hoping for as you were exploring his life, or when it came to when the records were being released in the old kind of Soviet era and stuff like that, did you feel apprehensive that you were going to find something maybe you didn't like about him, or did you kind of go in with an open mind?
No, I was very apprehensive. I think, answer to your first question, yeah, Zatopek was a hero of mine when, when I was much younger, and I wrote the book because a publisher rang me up about something else, and then said, "Oh, by the way, do you know anyone who might want to write a book about Emil Zátopek?" So I said, "Yeah, well, I would." And I think I'd thought about writing about him before, but I was very intimidated by the idea of writing a book about someone Czech because I was terrified of foreign languages and foreign countries and things like that, and it felt just like a huge undertaking. But as once the publisher had suggested it, and I didn't really want. I just thought, yeah, this is the book I've always wanted to write, because he was a hero in the sense of being a remarkable runner, but also, had a remarkable, an extraordinary character who was very charismatic, very inspiring to people all over the world for all sorts of different reasons. And as I thought it then, a very heroic figure in a fairly straightforward way, who stood up to the Soviets after they crushed the Prague Spring. And then when I looked into it, I found that a lot of it wasn't quite as simple as I thought. And there were, he had been a communist poster boy, and there were all sorts of suggestions. Some people thought, oh no, Zatopek, he was terrible. He was a double agent and he worked for the secret services, etc. And so I think, the chapter you're referring to, I think I actually called it "Say It Ain't So, Emil," because I was terrified that I was going to find that he was a total bastard and it was all a great fraud. But at the same time, I think that it was much more interesting and spoiler alert, without turn your sound off if you want to know the answer. But he wasn't a complete fraud or anything like that. And but at the same time, and there really wasn't any evidence that came out of the files that suggested he was. But at the same time, he was not a perfect figure. He was an ambiguous figure. He did crack under pressure from the communists eventually, he retracted some of the things he'd said denouncing the Soviets, and ended up being slightly despised by both the pro-communists and the anti-communists. But to me, he was a very good and interesting and fascinating and inspiring man who tried to make the world a better place for everyone he came across, and who was remembered with great love by thousands and thousands of people. not just in his own country. So I thought it was a great story to tell, and that really is why. And I was talking to Haranand earlier. Sometimes people ask me what was my best book, and well, my first answer is normally the next one. But apart from that, I always think of Today We Die Little as my best book. And yet, annoyingly, it hasn't been all that successful. And if you look at it on, I hate to think where it is on the bestseller list at the moment, but it's pretty low down. So I hope that answers your question and various questions you could ask as well.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Brilliant. John, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, just for Richard, it's on the shelf here, Zátopek, so I bought it.
Cool. I'll talk to you.
So, do you have a fascination with the Czech Republic? Because you said there are 3 books now you've done on Czech athletes. And follow-up question is, when you research, you go over there, you spend an X amount of time there, or you go back and forth? How do you do your research?
So, first answer was, initially I had no fascination with the Czech Republic. When I wrote the Zátopek book, it was actually he'd always been my hero. I always thought it was an interesting story. When I researched it, it was much, much more interesting than I thought it was. And one of the great things about it actually was the bits of his life where every minute of his day was chronicled by the Secret Service, because people were spying on him, and you get, all these long accounts of, he had a party in his house and he went into a kitchen and he said this to so-and-so. You think, my God, this is just fantastic thing for a writer to come across. It's like sort of, the unpublished diaries or whatever. So I did think at the time, God, I wonder if there are any other stories out here that are recorded like that. But I think that there are probably a lot of very interesting stories from the other side of what was the Iron Curtain that simply didn't get told, which would be well-known stories, but never became well-known stories. And, I just happened to know about the Czech Republic because while I was researching Zátopek, I made lots of friends out there. I started trying to learn the language. I became interested in the culture. And then various people told me about this female jockey who I then wrote about and said, why don't you write about her? And so that led to that. And then again, various people told me about Emmerich Rath, this dead tramp, and said, yeah, he's really interesting. Why don't you write about that? So I think my approach to books is that if there's an interesting story that hasn't been told, that's a really good thing to start with. And again, going back to fell running, that's what, made me think that fell running was a good thing to write a book about, because there were all these amazing and fascinating stories and characters, and no one seemed to have written about them before. So that, you think it's there waiting to be told.
Brilliant. Thank you, Richard. Yeah. Tino, you got your hand up? Richard, you have to locate Tino now on the screen.
I can see there. I'm
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. What I was wondering was a bit more general about sort of how you go about writing. But I don't know whether there's a big difference between the books on running that you've done and your other works. I'm more familiar with the former, but do you sort of consciously plan the structure or even sort of the flow, if you will, of your books beforehand, or do you sort of write as you go and then restructure, reevaluate, and sort of see where it ends up, basically? Or have you developed a sort of a habit by now that sort of has a fixed structure as you go about it? Because I do find sort of a similar flow to some of your books that I really enjoy, and I was wondering if that was a conscious decision on your part or not.
I think so one answer is that yes, I start off with a structure, a plan. I think you have to start off with a plan, but then also yes, I change it and change it again and rechange it and just keep tearing out the plan and making a new plan. And I sort of almost sometimes compare it with, I don't know, if you're trying to go on a journey through the mountains or something like that. You have your map, you think this is the route I'm going to take, and then you go a short way, and I don't know, if you're me, you probably then get lost and you think, well, hang on, I'm not there, I'm over here. So you have to replan your route. It's like, when your sat nav suddenly says rerouting, and you suddenly find you're going a different route. So most of my books, I start off with a plan and then tear it up and come up with a new plan and shuffle things around. Um, if I'm doing a biography, it tends to be a bit more straightforward. I think with the Zátopek book, for example, which I think I had to write in a great hurry, I had a structure and pretty much just stuck to it throughout, and it more or less told itself as a story, so it wasn't too difficult. Other books like The Race Against Time, I think I'd virtually been signed off by the publisher, and I thought, no, hang on, this is completely wrong. I've got to have a different first chapter and a different last chapter, and I was discussing with them and adding new material and shuffling it all up. And some, thinking of other running books, something like Running Free, which doesn't really have a particularly strong narrative thread to tell, and story to tell. That involved quite a lot of shuffling and thinking, what am I going to put where, and planning and replanning and so forth. And if you can detect a common thread through that, then I think that's probably quite revealing. And if it's a good sort of pattern, then that's great. And if it's not, then that's bad. But I think ultimately you end up, you write the sort of book that reflects the sort of person you are, and so maybe that's a sort of an imprint, part of my imprint of my personality, rather than conscious choice. And maybe I was trying to be more interesting, I would vary it much more, but I just end up doing things the same.
I guess you develop as a writer a certain style and a way of working and a certain voice, I suppose, and that's coherent through the four books. I was interested in you talking about the I don't know if this was a throwaway comment or a revealing comment, but you mentioned Race Against Time. You suddenly decided to write a new final chapter. That obviously last chapter in that book is quite key.
Sorry, no, it wasn't the final chapter. The final chapter was always going to be the final chapter.
Okay.
It's a new opening chapter, and there's maybe there's something else near the end, but it wasn't that last chapter, because
that was already part of the schedule, that you were going to run that race. That wasn't the last decision.
Or maybe it wasn't going to be the last. I can't remember. Maybe it wasn't going to be the end, but I always felt I had to do that race at the World Championships. And while I was writing the book, I was always terrified. And it was all happening at a time when there were transport strikes and air traffic meltdowns and something else. And I was terrified I wasn't going to get to Finland. And I thought, if I miss this, the whole book is totally screwed. And I've been working on it for several years. And I remember when I actually got on the plane and it took off, and I was just so relieved. And I thought, phew, whatever else happens, I'm going to get there. I'll be able to write something in this chapter.
Did you know that you were, presumably you looked at previous results and you knew that you would be able, you wouldn't be miles last. You knew that you were capable of competing at least.
No.
I
wasn't confident I'd be capable of competing. But one of the themes of the book, I don't know how if any of you have read it, but one of the themes of The Race Against Time is it's about how I got to late middle age or something and realized I was really, really declining as a runner, and was sort of losing my running mojo and general love of running, and constantly worrying about injuries and just generally thinking, I'm getting old and I'm not the person I used to be, and it's all very depressing. And then trying to rediscover how to be the best runner I could be, and getting back in the frame of mind of pushing myself, of trying my hardest, of trying to be the best runner and person I could be, and being excited about possibilities. And really, I had no idea of whether I would improve at all as a runner over the time when I was researching it. And I think in practice, I did improve quite a lot from, I don't know, age of 58, I guess, to the age of 62, something like that, where I should have been declining. In fact, because I was, improving my running habits from the point of view of dealing with age, I got better. So I ended up not humiliating myself quite as much as I might have done at the World Championships. But I was confidently expecting to come last, actually. But
remember you said, so I know we've got some more questions, but I just remember you saying you got quite a boost from that, like that process you just described, and you kind of rediscovered your the joy of running and your kind of mojo with running. Has that lasted? Are you still enjoying your running? Are you still running well? Are you still out there competing or not? And obviously, no pressure.
It's interesting. It's something that very much comes and goes. And because one of the drawbacks of being older is, you get injured much more, or you don't just get injured. Sometimes you just get slower, or things go wrong. You go backwards when you want to be going forwards, and it's very easy to get discouraged. I think the big difference I made, by what I found out from Race Against Time, was that rather than being permanently discouraged, I just got to a state where sometimes I discouraged. For example, at the end of last year, suddenly from no reason whatever, I got really bad knee pain. I couldn't work out what was wrong with my knee. I never really found out what it was, but for a couple of months, probably, I couldn't really run at all. And it was very, very depressing. But because of what I've learned from all the other old runners I've come across, I didn't let it make me as depressed as such things normally make me. I just said to myself, setbacks, this is part of the challenge. This is what being an older runner is going to be about, is all about. And the two things that when old runners ask me for advice, the two things I keep telling them these days. First of all is, it's really tough being an older runner, but it beats being an ex-runner. And the second thing is that, moaning about injuries and setbacks and all that, sort of the aches and pains and things like that, when you're an older runner, is like sort of moaning about hills when you're a fell runner. There is something to moan about, undoubtedly, but it's what you signed up for. And so, so this time when my knee went, I just thought, well, got to get through this. I've got to, work out what the problem is, try and do the exercises, try and keep fit, try and build up again. And so in terms of how good my running is, I tend to improve for a bit. And then since then, I've had, 2.5 months, no setbacks. I'm starting to feel a bit more confident again. I think I've got to push myself a bit more, do a bit of really punishing training. And that will continue until the next injury. And then I suddenly have to start again. But I think that's worth doing.
Yeah, no, it's a great lesson. Rob, you had a question. Do you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you. And I guess it kind of follows on from that. I mean, Feet in the Clouds, Running Free, Race Against Time have chronicled different phases of your running life, I suppose. And I've really been inspired by that as I've gone through different phases myself, and as I've got older and taken different interest in it and faced some different limitations, different challenges, I suppose. Do you see that there's another one of these in you about another phase of your running, or have we had the last one about your personal running experience?
I think I might have reached the end. I'm running when I'm dead, which if there's something I can do about that, then I will write back. But it's interesting. I mean, it's good to hear you say that, actually, because every time I've written about my own running, I've always thought, no one wants to read about my running. It's like, just a mediocre person running, and there are so many interesting runners out there with interesting stories. And when I wrote Feet in the Clouds, I only dared write about myself because I had all these other interesting people to write about. And then I wrote about myself in Running Free just because I thought there were some ideas I cared about that I wanted to put out there, and it seemed worth doing. And after that, I really thought, right, never again am I going to write about myself, because no one wants to read about this sort of thing. And then suddenly with the old age thing, I realized there was another thing that I wanted to tell partly through my own experience. But I just don't think, I might be wrong, but I just can't see myself having anything else interesting to tell people, as far as running is concerned anyway. I hope that I will from other things.
Thank you.
Fair enough. Yeah, you never know. You never know. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Henry, you've got a question.
Hi, Henry. Hi.
Yeah, hey. So I'm fairly new to this sort of world of running and cross country running, trail running. So forgive me if this is a very sort of obvious thing, but I've read Feet in the Clouds, and I'm halfway through the Race Against Time. I haven't read the Zátopek book, but I recognize the name because I'm based in Finland,
Oh,
and I remember reading on I think his Wikipedia entry that Zátopek was inspired by Paavo Nurmi, who was a very sort of famous Finnish runner. I wondered if you'd looked into any of the Finnish runners or Nurmi, for example, or ever thought about writing about them.
yeah, it's interesting. I don't know that much about Finnish runners. I know that Zátopek loved the Finnish run. I mean, not just Nurmi, he was inspired by all the Finnish runners, and he loved Finland, and many of his most important races were, in Finland and against Finns. And he taught himself to speak Finnish even, which was pretty impressive. The nearest, I think, the Finnish runner I'm most interested in is actually Lassi Viren. But I don't think I wouldn't know where to start with him. And I don't think there's a great biography of him has been written that I'm aware of. There was a wonderful long article, the interview with him, written by, what was his name? Not Kenny Rogers. Do I mean Kenny Rogers? He was a great runner and also a journalist. Anyway, if I was going to write about a Finnish runner, I think I would write about Lassi Viren, just because he was a mysterious figure and he took distance running to new levels, and he divided opinion, and some people, insisted he must be a cheat. And it really, if you look, I did once write an article about him for Runner's World. During the pandemic, they asked lots of us to write articles about races from times gone by because there was nothing happening in the racing world. And it was very interesting looking at Lassi Viren's performances in the Olympics and how people said, oh, he must be cheating. And yet, if you looked at what actually happened during races and in between, it seemed that really he was just, he was peaking at the right times and he was racing very sensibly during the races. But I think for me, Finnish would be a language too far to learn. But you never know.
Could be the seed of another idea there.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lassi Viren would be an interesting story. I remember there was one. I mean, people often, we talk about the Kenyans being this dominant running force, but there was a time people always say, well, there was a time when the Finns were like the dominant force in
Yes.
I used to say they must have some genetic advantage in Finland, and that seems strange now to us today. You don't see that many Finnish long distance runners, but yeah, there was definitely a moment when Finland was the greatest running nation on earth, which is
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it must have just been entirely a cultural thing,
yeah.
because there doesn't appear to be any genetic advantage. But yeah.
John, you had a question. You have your hand up.
Yeah, I think you've answered part of what I was going to ask when Adana was asking you, and you were saying about how you were feeling about your running and stuff. Because my experience as a near 66-year-old is similar to yours in relation to pain, and in terms of you get aches and pains, and sometimes you sort of think, is this an injury or is this just some sort of random pain? Because sometimes you get pains and they come and go almost within days. But I was interested to delve a little bit more into how you see your running as part of your life, because quite clearly you did explain a bit a moment ago. But I suppose where I'm coming from is as you get older, obviously, as you're saying, and in your race against time, but which I'm partway through, you sort of you want to keep going and you want to still enjoy doing the running, but it's almost like one's conflicted in sort of accepting, well, there's going to be this sort of steady decline. You can't really stop it. But there's parts of me, for example, that still thinks I can get faster. And I don't know whether that's just pure sort of wishful thinking. But so I was just interested in just delving a little bit more in terms of how you feel a bit more about your running and where it fits into your life, because obviously you're very successful with your writing. So I mean, how important is your running in terms of, do you have a structured training program, or do you just do what you feel like each day, sort of thing? And how does it sort of fit in?
Okay, well, I mean, I just start by going backwards a bit. 'Cause I think it was Rob, wasn't it, who talked about how the different books I've written have been about different phases of my life. And for a long time, the way running fits into my life, I've seen as being the way that I describe in running free, which is like a middle-aged the middle-aged phase of my life. And that was all to do with running entirely just for well-being. Going out, enjoying being in nature as much as the process of running in a very unstructured way, enjoying the movement of running, but not think, in that book, that's when I sort of threw away my watch and decided I just didn't care what times I did, and I didn't care what distances I ran because it was
didn't you also dabble with barefoot shoes?
Yeah, I mean, I still use barefoot shoes.
Right.
I have ever since, most of the time. And yeah, so it was all about sort of running just for the feel of being out there and just enjoying, on the basis that I was never going to set any records or do anything worthwhile in terms of winning races anymore, or in fact ever, but anymore anyway. But I could still enjoy running and all the well-being and the sort of sense of balance and flow and things that come from running. And so it's about running for pleasure rather than for the enjoying the process rather than the outcome.
Yeah.
And I would have been quite happy and would be quite happy to carry on like that for the rest of my life. What I found researching the Race Against Time was that actually, as you get older, that's not good enough. If you want to carry on running in a sort of spontaneous, natural way, you have to put a bit more of your mind into it, and you have to sort of start making a conscious effort. And I'm so just talking about, this year I had my knee injury, and then I've sort of been coming back to it, and I've been running without injury for a couple of months, and that feels good. But I'm very much just sort of dragging myself out the door and plodding off into the fields and waking up after about 10 minutes and thinking, oh, isn't it a nice morning, and coming back. What I've got to do, and I keep telling myself I'm going to do it tomorrow, maybe I will do it tomorrow actually, is I've got to go out and do some intervals or something like that, or do some speed training, do something that really hurts, and try to improve. And I've got to go to the gym and try and do some weight training and all the things that I think of as the sort of boring, the stuff that you have to do that I don't really want to do. But I think as you get older, if you want to not keep getting injured, and if you want to be able to get the buzz of competing in races and doing quite well, or hoping to do well, I think any older runner who can be faster this year than last year is doing really, really well. And it's sort of quite discouraging sometimes, where you think I've done really, really well, and actually all I've done is not get slower. But at the same time, it's great to have just a sense of purpose and goal, and if I do well, I can be improving. But I think as I get older, certainly, I think I just have to be a bit more sort of conscious about it, which is boring but necessary.
Yeah, I'm similar in the sense that I realise I need to be more structured, but unlike you, I don't mind doing the hill reps and stuff. I really enjoy that. So that's given me some hope.
That's good. Yeah, excellent.
Yes. Thank you.
Oh,
brilliant. Yeah. Well, you said you enjoy the hill reps. That's interesting, John, because I was going to ask you, Richard, whether is there some kind of enjoyment in doing the, like you say, the boring stuff, but like the intervals? Because I did a interval session on my own yesterday along a canal in the sun, and part of me hated it, but part of me kind of loved that that effort and that really pushing myself and really grimacing and struggling. And do you get any enjoyment from that?
Actually, I do. I admit. I mean, my attempts at intervals are pathetic, really. But there's a sort of big hill near where I live that's known as Heart Attack Hill, which is very, very steep. And sometimes when I bring I go out in the morning, I really don't fancy the idea at all. I don't want to do it. But if I do, and you do the first one, it feels horrible. And I just do sort of reps up there, not that many. And once you get going, you think, right, this is like being a young runner again. I'm just pushing myself to the absolute limit, and it feels fantastic. And afterwards, when you finished, you just feel so good. Oh, just absolutely floating on clouds as you run home again. That's brilliant. One tip I got from a top old runner was always always skip the final repeat, the final interval, which sort of is very counterintuitive and sort of goes against the idea that I'm really pushing myself as hard as I can. But in fact, if you're an old runner and you're sort of injury prone and you're really pushing yourself absolutely to your limits, then it's quite possible that that your 20th or your 12th or your 10th or whatever it is rep that you do is going to be the one that finally just snaps that tendon. And if you go stop one before the end, you're still going to have done yourself a fabulous amount of good. So I try to remember that. But in fact, once I'm in the mood to, once I think I'm being a proper runner again, I'm doing this seriously, I actually don't want to stop, even though it hurts.
That's interesting advice because the Kenyans, which is almost the same thing in a way, they always say you should end your intervals feeling like you could always do one more.
Right, yeah.
Is the same thing and a different way of thinking about it. But yeah, you don't want to be to the max. That save that for the race, they say. Dutch John, you've got another question.
Yeah, I was curious because you said you have ideas for books, but your publisher is not so interested in those ideas. I'm married with a very famous Italian yoga teacher.
Mhm.
She has a very big following on Instagram, on YouTube. She gets offered to write books because if you have a big following on social media, publishers want to publish your books. I have here the Instagram account of Richard Askwith with 2 posts.
Ooh, I thought I only mentioned one of them was an accident.
Yeah, that's the way it looks like. Um,
Awesome.
is
Yeah.
that also, if you talk about I don't like certain trainings to do, is that also something that's fused for you like, that's something I have to do, but I don't want? Because it could be a way to write books you want to write because the publisher knows that people are going to buy it anyway because you have a big following.
That is very true. Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, the trouble is, I mean, some people are good at social media. I'm just not good at social media. I write books partly because it seems better than talking in a way, you want to say something, you can't quite work out the best way to say it, and if you write it down on paper and then you might rewrite it, and eventually you end up saying something the way you want to do it. Doing something like Twitter or Instagram, I mean, I don't even really understand how Instagram works, but with Twitter, which I briefly tried to do, but I just don't have that sort of casual frame of mind of just saying stuff and you don't care if you offend people or not. And I always worry about what I say, what the effect of what I say is going to be. And so yeah, I ought to do social media and get hundreds of thousands of followers, but it seems like it would take out a lot of time, and I might not write a book in that case. And partly because for every little tweet or post, I spend hours agonizing: have I got this right? Should I change it? Should I change that word? Do it differently, etc. So unless I become a completely different person, I fear that might not happen.
That's a really interesting question because sometimes I feel like I almost put too much time into social media, and then I always think, well, Richard Askwith doesn't do any social media, so I don't need to do so much. Why am I worrying about it?
I can't hear anything.
Oh, are you there? Can you hear us, Richard?
There was somebody just sound.
Can you hear me? Can anyone else hear me?
I can hear you now. Sorry.
Everyone else can hear me. I was just saying it was quite an interesting question because sometimes I feel like I almost put too much time and effort into social media. Not that I'm prolific. I'm not, but I do post stuff less these days since Twitter died. But I will always have this thing that if I neglected to post something, I always think, well, Richard Askwith never posts, so and he's still writing books. So you're my inspiration not to need social media. So I'm kind of somewhere in the middle, maybe. But yeah, I often think of you and think, well, Richard doesn't post, and he gets by.
I always think I should be like Ed Haranand and have a proper following and post interesting things and things like that. So, but I think there is a lot to say for it, but yeah, we can only do what we can do.
Yeah. Henry, your hand is up.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess my
No.
sports, uh, where the sport is going at the moment is sort of long distance running or sort of trail running or cross country running. Um, it it seems to me that I sort of come into the sport at a point where it's becoming increasingly, what's the word? Sort of sort of a more focus on entertainment, and sort of bigger and brighter, more interesting and more fun, and the sort of funification of this sport. And I'm wondering if you had any feelings about how it's changed and if this change is a good thing. If you see what I mean.
Yeah, no, I see exactly what you mean. I mean, Running Free, which is the book I wrote I think it came out in 2014. So it came out about 10, 12 years ago, 11 years ago, so I'm not going back, was largely about that. It was about the idea that running, is one of the most natural and simple activities in the world. And all you really need is, a pair of shoes and the will to step out your front door and start running. And somehow in my lifetime, it's gone from being a very, very low cost thing to a thing that, if you believe everything you read in the media and in the advertisements and things, you can't even do it without spending thousands and thousands of pounds on kit and going to race experiences and things. It's very noticeable at the moment in trail running, which has gone from being just something that a few weird eccentrics did when they went into the mountains to becoming this whole international industry. But it's happened to all forms of running. I mean, people who ran on roads just used to do it with a pair of old gym shoes and a pair of shorts, and that was it. And then suddenly, all this sports science that has made Olympic performances much better is being marketed to the general public, and the general public have been persuaded that to be a proper runner, you have to spend a lot of money. And I guess in prosperous times, a lot of us maybe think that if I'm going to go and run in the mountains, I might as well pay for a curated experience and go off on have a properly organised race. I mean, the traditional fell race, which I've loved doing many times in my life. You go to the mountains, there's someone waiting there with a few race numbers, and that's it. And they say, right, you're going to the top, come back again, off you go, and that's it. And you go to a trail race, and it's properly organised, and you get everything from your timing chips to your goodie bags at the end to I don't actually think what you get, but you have to pay for it. And Running Free was a book that, loosely speaking, argued that it was much better to enjoy running just as the natural experience it used to be, rather than buying into it. I mean, really, the world's big enough for everyone to run in their own way, and I don't think it's necessary to say that you shouldn't run like this or you should run like that. But you don't have to go for the whole commercialized entertainment package. You can just, with running especially, you can just go out and run. And I hate to think of people being deterred from running is such a sort of life enhancing thing that it just seems very sad if people are thinking of toying with the idea of taking it up and then thinking, oh, well, no, I can't afford it. It's too upmarket for me. So I hope people always remember that really to run, you just need to run.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's my next book to read then. I'll get on to that.
Great. Rob, you got your hand up again. Do you want to ask another question?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's kind of following on from that again. Whenever I go onto YouTube now, the algorithm works out that it's going to show me 17 different short films about Bob Graham round or Barkley marathons or what have you. You're just surrounded by content about what 10 years ago would have been incredibly niche, I suppose.
Mm.
And I wonder how that affects writers in this age where things are there's more content about things already. I mean, is that kind of making it harder to write an interesting, innovative tale about things that are kind of less well known, I suppose? Would you be still writing Feet in the Clouds in 2025, I suppose?
I think if all this stuff was out there, I no, I wouldn't. It wouldn't have occurred to me to write Feet in the Clouds. I think a book can give you stuff that 10,000 videos on YouTube can't give you. And one of the things is that the material is curated and is presented in a certain way, and you go on one particular journey rather than just randomly scrolling through this infinite amount of stuff. But I think I wrote Feet in the Clouds because I felt that there was this fascinating world that people didn't know anything about. I think now people know all sorts of stuff. Although I think you could still miss all the interesting stories in the great mass of material. Um, but I guess a book, writing a book like Feet in the Clouds would be a totally different experience now. And I mean, as Harry and I might agree, I think the great hazard for writers is if you're researching something, then you think, well, what's out there on the internet? And you just go more and more, and there's more and more and more to see. And you can quite easily find that, weeks past and you haven't written a word and you've just watched 20,000 videos on YouTube instead. But one of the things I have noticed about YouTube, which is good, is that you can watch. When I was writing Feet in the Clouds, there's a lot of the running of the elite runners that I hardly saw. I hardly watched. I would, be running in a race, and then all the elite runners would run down in the opposite direction past me because they were so far ahead, and I'd see them then. But it's fascinating. I was watching a YouTube video of Finley Wild running the Ben Nevis race, and someone was filming him coming all the way down. You could just see the way he planted his feet and the movements and his rhythm, and you think, wow, so that's how it's done. And I'd never really just that one video. Nowadays, when I run down a mountain, I always try and get that one video in my head and just think, this is how to do it. Let's get that rhythm, do it like that. So it's great that it's out there, but it has changed the world completely.
It's fascinating to see the examples where real storytellers have embraced the medium, I suppose. I quite enjoyed the Guardian piece about Joss Naylor a few months ago. Do you see that?
What I think I might have written it actually, but I don't.
No, the video.
Oh, video. Oh, right. No. Oh, no, I didn't. No. It
was about a 10 or 15-minute piece,
right.
And some of it is archive footage, and some of it is reenacted. But it had a real kind of narrative feel to it. I thought it was pretty well done.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw that. It was good. I do think a book is a different way of telling a story, though. I think it's a similar with the fell running as with Kenya. Like when I went out to Kenya, I found a couple of news pieces from Kenyan TV about Iten, and that was it. And now, if you went on YouTube and searched Iten Kenya, you'd find hundreds and hundreds of films about it. But I still feel like, but the book is a completely different experience. As a reader, you're going into somebody's world in a way you don't do in a film. But so yeah, I agree with Richard. It would be a different experience now having all that material. I would feel a little bit overwhelmed by it, I think, having so much to look through. You'd almost potentially think, do I even need to go there? I don't know. I mean, I guess we would have to the way where I wrote it and the way Richard wrote Feet in the Clouds, but it has changed the landscape. But I don't think it negates books. I remember when I first started writing, this must have been, it was a few years after Feet in the Clouds, but I wrote Running with the Kenyans. And there were lots of news reports at the time how books basically wouldn't exist in 10 years. and I was like, oh, this is a great time to be starting out as an author. But they're still there and they're still as popular as ever. And I think that's because it is a different experience reading a book. It's more immersive. It's more spread over many weeks as opposed to like a film, even like is an hour at most or 2 hours. This thing that stays with you over days and days and days, and you begin to kind of become part of your kind of consciousness is a different thing. So I think there's still room for books on subjects that have been covered in film, but it would make the research uh, different, a different experience, I think.
And the other thing about books, of course, is that the reader contributes something to it in the way that when you're watching a film, you're basically just sitting there and it's all being delivered to you. With a book, you're engaging with it. Your imagination is responding to the way. So it's both parties are taking part in the experience.
Yeah, completely amazing. Yeah. Mario, you've got a question?
Yeah, good evening to everyone. So it's not really a question, it's more like a comment. Just to say that to Richard that I've read 3 books of yours so far, and I enjoyed all of them. I read Fate in the Clouds. Actually, I've listened to the audiobook, and I wanted to say that your voice is fantastic in the audiobook. Am I right? You are the person reading that book, right?
Yes, I am. Thank you. Yes,
and I also I recommend it because listening to your voice is make it very special. And I did not know anything about fair running, so for me it has been like a discovery, and I really appreciated that, and I can only say that I would be happy to read it again, and I look forward to read it again. The book. I've read Running Free, and as a part of the book club, we read together with the Darandan and the group. Today we die a little, and which is our top scored book. My comment was, nowadays the news are dominated by Trump and doing all these kind of taxes on trade. Which is kind of demoralizing a bit, looking at it from as a common person and a common citizen, feels like a nonsense. I think politics nowadays often feels like a nonsense, probably to most of people. And if you look at the wars, wars in Israel, Palestine, in Ukraine, Russia, and everywhere else in the world, it feels like politics is failing. And sometimes I feel reading your books, the 3 books I mentioned. Actually, I was able to find some meaning, meaning to life, meaning to the things we do in our life. And if I think if a book can help a person to create some meanings or create some dreams, thinking about the book of Zátopek, the fact that during the Olympics he used to leave his own national group to go to a different group during the night, and he was crossing boundaries. He was going from one national group to another one just to meet the girlfriend of the wife. I don't know. It's like, at the end of the day, sport is a way to bring people together, to kind of create well-being for the individual, in the sense that that kind of well-being can also have an impact on society, At the end of the day, if you feel well as a person, if you feel well mentally, you're going to be a better citizen, and society is going to work better, and hopefully with no wars. I think that is the power of sport, the power of running. And that comes through very well through the books I've read of yours. And really, I think my comment was just a way to say, well done, keep writing, please. Because obviously, keep writing, because I think we need such good books and such good writers. And just that comment from a remote part of Italy where I'm staying at the moment.
Thank you very much. That's very kind. I mean, I think one of the reasons I think that Zátopek was such a great story to tell is that at the 1952 Olympics, it was such a bad time in the world. I mean, the Second World War was over, but the Cold War was really getting pretty nasty, and he had Soviet guards with machine guns outside one of the athletes' villages. And it was a very scary time to be alive. And Zatopek, everyone was aware of what he was doing and the effect he was having on just bringing the nations together. And one of the interesting things I found when I started writing the book about Zátopek was, if I told younger colleagues or younger runners or whatever what I was writing about, I said, writing about Emil Zátopek, I said, we've never heard of him. Who was that? If I talked to older people, even if they weren't sports fans, just people in the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s, who had been alive then, lots of them had no interest in sport. But said, oh, Zátopek, I remember him. Oh, yeah, he was great. Just a memory of him brought a smile to people's faces. And yeah, I think that's, stories like that are worth telling. And that's
brilliant. Yeah, I'd say it's interesting to see him in that light of today. He's a kind of beacon of, like, even in those dark times, he was still shining, and yeah, it's a kind of beacon of light. Yeah, nice. Thank you, Mario. Lydia, you've got a question. This might be the last one, so we'll see.
Try and make it a good one.
Oh, it has to be good now.
Everyone. Hello, Richard.
Hello, hi. Let's see.
Nice to see you. One of my favourite bits about running free was the sort of image of you getting home from the run and immediately having to write down your thoughts from the run. That's something I sort of remember quite vividly. Do you still write like that? Do you still write in a running free kind of way? You have thoughts on the run and just need to get them down?
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, I think what I find, I'm sure lots of runners will find this, and maybe it's not about writing, but it's about something else, is often I just sort of don't consciously go out and think, right, I'm going to run and I'm going to think of some clever thing to write. I go out, I go for a run. Absorbed by what I'm doing. I'm absorbed by, the countryside I'm running through, and just by the experience of running and getting exhausted and waking up, and getting into a rhythm, all that sort of stuff. I've completely forgotten that I have work to do right now. And I don't know where it came from or why it came from, but it's a really useful thing. And for me, it tends to be something I'm writing, but it might be something, you could be, I don't know, you could be making something else. I think, oh, that's what I need to do. That's how I solve that problem. But with writing, often it's a sort of sentence or something like that. I think, yeah, that's the way to say it. And I've got to hang on to that for the rest of the run. and there have been times where I'd sort of experimented with, having a recorder or something on me, or saying it into my phone, but as such I just never could master it. Or taking a notebook, but then you sort of get your pen out and you got your sweat all over it, and then you write it, and then you think, no, I won't do it like that, won't do that, and your whole thing's broken. But so I just sort of run them, but I just try and keep a certain phrase in my head, or a certain sentence, or sometimes you turn it over and you come up with and it comes into a paragraph, or sometimes you get quite a lot written in your head without even trying. And then there's this desperate challenge of getting home and writing it all down, before your family start talking to you, oh, the dog needs its breakfast or whatever, So it's a challenge, but I do think it's a wonderful thing about running, the way it just sort of, it unblocks things. It creates this sort of flow in your brain. And I think that's terribly good for well-being as well as for problem solving.
Yeah, I agree, and I have the same thing. But like you say, not always just about writing, but sometimes just about some problem I'm dealing with in my day-to-day life. It like you say, it pops in. You're not thinking about it; it just pops into your mind, uninvited, unsolicited, but welcome. Midway through the run, oh, I know what I could do.
Yeah.
But do you? I sometimes, when it does come to writing, sometimes I'm like, I do forget. I like most of the time I do the same thing as you. I repeat it over and over. And is that frustrating? Or do you never forget the?
Oh no, sometimes I forget stuff. It's really frustrating. It's very upsetting.
Yeah.
I think probably if the good stuff comes back.
That's exactly what I tell myself as well.
Yeah, exactly. The strange thing I also found is sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and the thoughts come into my head, a bit of writing. Or something like that, and I write it down. I think I must write that. Suddenly get out of bed and I've got to write that down. It's so good, I've got to forget it. I mustn't forget it. But then I come back to it in the morning, and it's just, I thought, what's this gibberish? It doesn't make. So it's come out of the wrong part. It's not the same as running. It doesn't work so well.
Brilliant. Cool. Okay. Well, I think that's our sorry, our hour up. But thank you, Richard, and thank you everyone for coming and asking.
Thank you everyone for coming. Yeah, it's been fascinating, and thank you for all those great questions as well. It's been really interesting.
Yeah, it's been a real fun evening. There is a message for you, Richard. I don't know if you can access the chat, or do you want me to copy and paste it to you?
Those ones.
It looks quite interesting about your book. It's worth noting. I'll copy and paste it. Okay.
It's not a question. It's just something you might already be aware of. But I was just looking at it, and I thought, oh well, it seems to coincide really nicely. If there's anything you might still want to do on Emmerich Rath, because it sounds like he's got such an interesting story to tell.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, I spent quite a lot of time in Broomhoff already, which is including he spent he ended up sleeping on a park, sleeping in the park there as a tramp. So I tried sleeping rough in the park just to see what it was like. It was bloody freezing, I'll tell you that much.
So this book has been written. It's just a matter of whether it's going to be published.
No. I have done most of the research. I think it's just a question of I'm going to have to sort of write it in between earning a living from other things, I think. So, and as with anyone who, I don't know how many of you, I know that at least two of you are book writers, but a lot of book writing is about, you have a lot of crises of confidence, and sometimes you think, yeah, this is a great story, I've just got to go out and do it. And then a lot of the time you're thinking, well, this is really, no one's going to want to read this. This is stupid. And you have to somehow get the balance between the two. But I think in life generally, whether it's writing or running or anything else, it's always better to have a go and make a fool of yourself if necessary than not.
Well, that's a great point to end on. I think totally true. Like you say, you can. I was thinking you said it here, but I heard you say it somewhere else where you said you turn up at a race and you were in your car and you thought, I don't want to do this. I'm just going to leave, and then you got out and did it, and that was the spark to set you off on your latest your race against time book. Anyways, I'm waffling.
No, that's true, and I think that comes in Race Against Time. But I mean, I think the thing I realised was, because I didn't want to take part in this race because I hadn't raced for years, and I was like, this is ridiculous. I'm going to come last by miles. I'm going to make a fool of myself. And then I thought, well, there are millions and millions of men my age who aren't going to make a fool of themselves this evening because they're not going to be having a go. So, what's so great about not making a fool of yourself?
Yeah.
And so I had a go and came last, I think, but it was good.
And people don't, you're not really making a fool of yourself anyway. We've all seen somebody come last and we don't think they're a fool. So
exactly, yeah. And someone has to, yeah. Otherwise, no one would win the races.
So let's get out there, everyone, and
everyone get out there.
Of ourselves.
Yeah. Cool. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone, for coming. It's been really.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thanks very much.
Thank
you.